Hello, Jijel.
Hi!
How's everyone doing today?
Great!
So I'm here all the way from Algiers, all the way from the United States, to talk to you about a subject that's very near and dear to my heart as a cultural attaché working for the US Embassy. And that's the power of cultural exchange. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why I'm here, how I became a cultural attaché. Next slide. And I'm going to start with a little bit of, not the right one. The first slide. No, that before. There we go. Okay. So first I'm going to tell you a story. This is a personal story about when I was an exchange student. It's in 2003, and I took off from the United States and I went to Paris. And I was studying at l'Institut d'études politiques in Paris, and I was the only American in my class. A class with 20 other students, all of whom were French. And the class was, I think, the history of 20th century international relations, something like that. And in this French class, in the French educational system, which I'm sure you guys know better than I do, we all had to do exposés. You had to get up in front of a class, speak for 20 minutes. For me, speaking in front of a class 20 minutes in French still is a dagger of fear in my heart. But anyway, this particular day, it was two French students giving an exposé. And the topic of the exposé was very interesting to me as an American. Their exposé was on the export of American culture between World War I and World War II. So in the 1920s and 1930s. And I have two pictures up here, both of which were taken in the United States in the 1920s. In their exposé, these two French women talked about picture number one. The United States was grim, it was gray, it was steel, it was the automobile, it was factories, it was poor working conditions, it was smoke, pollution, it was negative. And that's what they talked about for 20 minutes. I kept sitting waiting, okay, when's the other side of this story? Yeah, this is a picture taken in the United States in the 1920s. That's not untrue. They weren't lying, but they're only presenting part of the story, a kernel of truth. This other picture here on the right, I don't know if you can see it so well in the back, also taken in the United States in the 1920s. If we're talking about American culture, there's no better time for American culture than the 1920s. The 1920s in America is when you had black music joining with Eastern music and Western music to create jazz for the first time, 1920s. Also, you had new technology, film, invented in America in the 1920s, both of which are pieces of culture that the French adopted with open arms as part of their culture, jazz and film. You had artists and writers. You had F. Scott Fitzgerald, Gertrude Stein, Ernest Hemingway, writing some of the best books in the American canon of literature in the 1920s. And you know where they wrote them? They lived in Paris. They were all living in Paris. But all of these facts that are part of the truth were left out of that story. And sitting there as a foreign student in a foreign country, listening to this foreign perspective of my country that was only part of the truth, not the full truth, just made me realize how easily and quickly stereotypes and misunderstandings and even prejudice can spread in this world. And I decided then that I wanted to do something about it. And I also want to ask you guys, let's do a little audience participation. Let's talk about stereotypes and prejudice in America today. And I want to hear some examples of maybe some stereotypes that people have that you might know about America, or about Americans. What does an American look like? Feel free to yell it out. Racist. Americans are racist. What else? Blood-sucking capitalists. All right, we're getting descriptive. That's good. What else? What do we look like? What color are we? What religion are we? Sorry? Obese. Yeah, we're all, look at us. We're all fat, right? Imperialists. What else? What language do we speak?
Arabic.
Only English. There's some Spanish too. Sorry? Can somebody yell it a little louder? Broken English? Broken English, don't speak well, maybe not educated, bigoted. All these things are things you hear about the United States. And listen, like I said before, many stereotypes, but not all, but many stereotypes are based in a kernel of truth. They're not untrue, but it's never the full story. So I have a couple of graphs here I want to show you. What does an American look like? Are we all white? Are we all fat? Well, this is something that's constantly changing. And you can see in our lifetime, by 2060, there won't even be 50% white in America. There'll be black, be Latino, and there'll be other. Languages. Everyone thinks Americans only speak English. C'est pas vrai. In fact, about a quarter of all Americans can speak fluently in a second language. And I've got another fact here that I bet you didn't know. What's the fastest growing second language in the United States? A lot of people say Spanish. There's already a lot of Spanish speakers, so it's not the fastest growing. Any other guesses? اللغة العربية. صح. It's the fastest growing language in the United States between 2010 and 2014, 29% increase in Arabic speakers. Is America violent? No one said violence, but this is a big one, and this is important, because this touches into the media and the way the media plays into stereotypes. What do we see when we turn on the television? Not just about America, but about the entire world. Violence. We have a phrase in American English in journalism school that says, if it bleeds, it leads. If there's blood, if there's violence, if there's crime, those are the stories at the top of the newspaper, the first story when you turn on the television. And I'm not blaming the media. This is human nature. When we think about news, when we think about the things that we are interested in, it's often what shocks us. It's often the types of stories that produce the strongest emotion. And those stories are often about violence, about crime, about war, about terrorism, about rape, all those types of terrible things that unfortunately continue to happen in this world. The problem is that when we only see those stories and we don't dig deeper and we don't try to understand more about the nuance, about the rest of what's going on in the world, sometimes we think those stories, that's all there is, and that's not true. If you look at America, and not just America, if you look at the entirety of the world, and I would include Algeria for sure in this, violence is drastically down. People on the left, if you can't read the writing on here, this is, the left is the people who think violence is going up. So you can see that that is increasing, even when violence in the United States has been decreasing quite rapidly since the 1990s. What about violence, racism, cops violence? A huge problem in the United States. I'm not minimizing these problems at all, but it's important to put them into context. Violence against African Americans by cops, down over the last 2 decades. What about sexual violence in the United States? Same story, down. So what I'm getting at here is that there's always more to the story. There's always a little bit more to the story. And sometimes what we see on the news or what we hear is not always true. So I want to flip this around. We took some digs at the United States and the stereotypes. Let me ask you, what do you think Americans think about Algerians? So first of all, America's far away. we're a fairly isolated continent, but also a fairly isolated country. Americans may not know that much at all about Algerians. But a lot of Americans may know something. They may know that Algeria is an African country. They may know Algeria is a Muslim country. They may know Algeria is an Arab country. And they may have certain prejudices. They may have certain stereotypes. They may have certain assumptions they make about all of those associations. I did a little study of my own, so to say. In our office, we have computers that look like they're in the United States. So I did a little Google search. I typed in, let's see, Algeria is, and just see what Americans are searching for when they type America is. And this gives you a little bit of a sense. The first, if you can't read, it says, Algeria is beautiful like America. I was happy to see that first. It's actually the title of a book. That's why it came up first in the search. But then you get into some of the stereotypes and misconceptions or the lack of understanding. Algeria is in what continent? People may not even know. Algeria is where is number 3. Algeria is France, which I don't understand why anybody's particularly writing that into Google, but clearly a misconception. But then you get into what I want to talk about. Algeria, is it safe? Is number 5. Number 7, Algeria, is it safe to travel? Because what do Americans see when they turn on the news? What assumptions are they going to be making? They're going to see war in Iraq. They're going to see war in Afghanistan. They're going to see Syria. All of these things, and they're going to make assumptions based on those places. Why does it matter? It's an important question. Why does it matter that some French students didn't talk about jazz in my class? Or why does it matter if Americans maybe don't know what continent Algeria is on? It does matter, and I'll tell you why. This is the Global Conflict Tracker put together by the Council of Foreign Relations. It's a little hard to see, I know. But if you look at all those red dots, that's where you have conflict in the world. And if you look at those red dots, I guarantee you at the heart of almost all of them, there's stereotypes, there's prejudice, there's misconceptions. You have red dots where you have conflict between the Arabs and Jews, or between Sunni Arabs, Sunni Muslims and Shia Muslims. Same with the Chinese and the Muslims, the Pakistanis and the Indians. If you look at the 1990s in Yugoslavia, same story. At the heart of so much conflict in the world, and not just on a global scale, if we look at the conflict within our communities, between black people and white people, between immigrants and non-immigrants, you have prejudice, you have misconception. So it's critically important, in my mind, that we try to address this issue. So the question is, how do you do that? There's one thing that I think does not work. In fact, there's one thing in the world that's going on right now that I think is making everything a little bit worse, and that's social media. Now, I'm a big fan of social media. I'm on every social media. You can find me easily. I think it's great for organizing people. I think it's great for making friends. I think it's great for staying in touch with your friends and family. But I don't think it's great for stereotypes. For 2 reasons, I'll tell you why. First, social media tends to give you information and give you access to organizations that already have the same opinions that you hold. So if you like a page on Facebook or you interact with a page on Facebook, Facebook's gonna show similar pages with similar opinions to you. And what that does is it tends to create these information silos, what we call information silos, where people are going back and just getting the same opinions over and over and reinforcing their views. Secondly, I don't think anybody changes their mind from Facebook arguments or from arguments on Twitter, arguments online. I like this graph. If you can't read it, this is a pie chart of sorts. The green is you change your mind in an argument on Facebook. The blue is they change their mind in an argument on Facebook. And the red, in other words 100%, is no one changes their mind on anything and everyone leaves pissed off. In my experience, that's what happens when we try to have these types of arguments on social media. And so the question is, how do people change their minds? And I think that the research is clear. And I'll cite one example, another personal example. I went to high school in Atlanta. I lived in a mostly white neighborhood. But my school would bus in kids an hour each way, black kids, from the inner city of Atlanta. And so we had about 40% of our school was black, 60% was white. And they've done studies in the United States on this type of integration. And they find that kids, both black kids and white kids, who go to schools that are mixed, hold fewer prejudices against other people than students who go to schools of just one ethnicity or just one race or just one color. So that's why I think that we have to get ourselves together. It has to be face-to-face. It can't be electronic. And I want to leave, I started with a personal story about an exchange. I want to end with one more story about an exchange that I found incredible. My first tour was in Yemen. I was a cultural attaché at the US Embassy in Sana'a. That's me, if you can see the white guy in the middle, of 30 Yemeni students who all did a year exchange in the United States at a high school. And I love this program. I love it because we don't send these kids to New York, Chicago, Boston, Houston. We don't send them to big cities all the time where you already have a lot of diversity. Often we send these kids into the heartland of the United States. And there's a woman in the front with a headscarf. Her name is Noor, or let's call her Noor. And she was assigned to a place in the United States called the Ozarks. It's in rural Missouri. And if we're talking about stereotypes, there's a stereotype which is not true, that the Ozarks is this place that's backwards, it's behind the times, and it's all white. That's true for the most part. And she went into a community of 300 people, 300 Americans. And she was not only the only Arab, the only Muslim in that community. For those 300 people, she was the first Muslim and the first Arab they had ever met in their entire lives. And if you went and asked those people before Noor went there, what do you think about the country of Yemen? If they knew anything about Yemen, it'd be related to what they saw in the news. It'd be terrorism. It'd be Osama bin Laden's ancestral homeland. It would be the underwear bomber. Those are the only stories that make it to the United States about Yemen. But I guarantee you, it's been 10 years. If you went back to any of those 300 people in that community, or even their friends and family, and they say, what do you think about Yemen? They're going to say, oh my God, we had this girl, Noor, in our school. She was amazing. She taught us about the culture. She taught us about the food. She taught us about the traditions. She showed us pictures. It's beautiful. Their minds will be completely changed. And that's powerful. That's one girl that affected 300, perhaps plus people. So my call to you today is to do that, is to be the next Noor, to travel, be exchange students, represent yourselves, represent your country, represent your religion, represent your continent, your part of the world, because I guarantee you, in today's siloed world of information and prejudice and stereotypes, this is how we change it, and this is how it works. Thank you very much.